Okay, welcome back to part 3 of the last Witchhunter, picking up where I left off. So he separates the 3 crystals from one another, puts them in his pocket, and warns the young man, don't let me see you in this way again, or I'm taking you to the witch's council. It's going to be a problem. And he was like, all right, he understood. So he gets up and goes back to his seat. Now he's passing, he's finesses talk to the stewardess. And the Lord brought this revelation to me as much as I didn't want to see it. As he was talking to the stewardess, he was finessing her, and he was like, oh, are you part this nationality? Oh, yeah. He was like, talking to her. She was like, I didn't know you recognized that. How did you know that? And he's like, I've had a lot of time to recognize a lot of things over time. I've met a lot of people that had a lot of your ethnicity in them. And you could tell he was like trying to. It's Vin Diesel, okay? It's Vin Diesel. He was trying to finesse her. So, anyway, she's like, oh, wow. And I have to say this. For some of you, your God-ordained spouse had that finesse about them that if he stopped and talked to a woman, they'd probably be like, oh my God, really? Because of where he was. Now remember, up high, in a plane, height, level, echelon, height, mountain, top, above the clouds, up there. Your God-ordained spouse has status. There were women amongst where he is, or what have you. Some of them he just desired. Remember, we talked about Samson before. Samson told his father, go get her for me. That's the person I want. Go get her for me. Some of your spouses got clout like that. Some of them. That if they wanted to, they could tell a friend of theirs, go get it. That's the one I want to go get. And some of them got caught up in counterfeits like that. Remember, we did the review of A Thin Line of Love and Hate. What was that main character doing? He kept trying to finesse somebody that did not want him. But he knows she was crazy. Some of you men thought they was going to slip in and out of some people's beds, and they were going to be delusional or not. It was going to be an in and out scenario. Why am I saying this? Because the next scene, the pastor friend of his comes to visit him. Okay. And he reaches his hotel, a transitionary place. Your God-ordained spouse was in a transitionary place. And he goes to the bellman and says, so can I go up to the room? He says he's in a meeting. God was pulling on your husband's coattails, but he kept telling God, I'll get with you. I'll get with you. I'll see you after the meeting. I'll see you after. You get what I'm saying? And he was allowing the proclivities of these counterfeits, because what happened is when the guy was sitting there waiting to go see him, the woman from the plane comes out of the elevator and leaves. God was trying to get your husband's attention, but he was distracted by these pretty counterfeits. That's what took him so long to answer God. And he could not bring you to him until he answered him first. Which brings me to the next part. When he gets up to the room, he's coming to tell him, I'm switching positions, meaning he's shifting out of the position he's in and is going to have a replacement take his place. It reminds me of the scripture where Jesus is telling the disciples that I am leaving you, but I am going to leave you with a what? Comforter. You understand what I'm saying? So he comes in and he's going into his closet. As he's going into his closet, there is a moment where you see him do something. This blew my mind when I watched him do it, because I saw him do it in the film, but until I was writing the note, did it not make sense to me. The man has a ring on his finger. Let me use the one that has the ring on it. I have rings on my fingers. The man had a ring on his finger, but it's a specific type of ring. Your husband blew my mind when I saw this. He went over to the cabinet. He did not take a key out. He took his ring out. He took his hand that had the ring on it and turned the lock on the door. The Lord showed me, follow this, let's see, that due to the fact of your husband, there is 3 ways that he has the ability to unlock. I'm going to make that point in 1 second. So he has 3 ways to unlock the door. The ring is a key to unlock it. Now, this is what the Lord showed me while I was looking at his ring. Now, the wedding ring will either be a key to unlocking shut doors that have not been able to be opened because the ring is needed for them to get where they need to go. Same for you, that when you have the ring, it will unlock doors. 2, the ring, Thiaphan hedge of protection around you and your spouse, around about you both. That will be a key necessary to opening up sacred doors of information that you did not know. Jeremiah 33:3, I believe it is. And lastly, your spouse has a ring that is a key to open the door to your marriage, but only he has it and has the ability to use it. If you didn't recognize that. But I want to go back in the note and I want to bring up this. The priest starts to talk to him while he is doing all those things. And what it is your spouse is being put through trials and certain tribulations, tests over time frame. That man had been going through this 1,800 years. He's been going through tests. Your spouse was being put through tests. But just like Jesus went into wilderness and was tested. But he had to go through a test to come out of the wilderness. Now, his friend, the old priest, God was pulling on him and he was allowing distractions. Now, we just talked about double-minded and all this type of stuff to take up space. Oppression, depression, all this kind of stuff come in, take up space, fill the empty, open space God's trying to give them. It's like, I'm giving you the space. Are you going to take it? And he didn't. So it allowed for sabotage and the women and all this stuff, work, other things, fill that space. We're talking about this. As he was sitting up there letting the father wait. Now, after that, all the weapons were inside of this closet. While he's sitting there talking to his old friend that night, he's telling him, as he's handing over the assignment to somebody else. I just talked about Jesus. And the man tells, the witch hunter tells the man, I thought you was going to be there with me the whole way. And he said, well, I've gotten to the point that I can get you. There are people in your God-ordained spouse's life that he thought were going to be there all the way up and through. And God is cutting them off. Okay, let me just make that clear right there. Next, he said, I've been here with you for 50 years. Some of your God-ordained spouses have had friends with them since they were children. But they hadn't changed, so the friends around them couldn't change either. They may have changed to degrees, but they didn't change enough to break off the connection with certain people. When he made full changes and started making full transitions, guess what? Those people had to fall off. Reason, season, lifetime. His friends he thought were going to be there forever. Family members, certain people couldn't stay. Due to the fact that this witch hunter has been around for 37 periods of time. This is why I called it 1,800 to 1,500 years. Because this man was 50 years old. Not 50 years old. He had been with him for 50 years. Okay? And most of the people that came in were in their early 20s and what have you. And stayed with them till they were older. If they didn't die. So if he'd been there for 50 years, assuming everyone made it 50 years, they either were less or a little bit more. It was anywhere around 1,500 years or 1,800 years later. That this man, he's been here this last 50 years. So, as he's preparing to get ready to leave, he's telling the man, or shall I say, telling the witch hunter, don't you think you've been around long enough that maybe you should stop just hooking up with anybody? He's like, what do you mean? I don't hook up with anybody. He's like stewardess on the airplane. And it's like, he laughed. You know how dudes do. Get that? Yeah. Now, I already explained the stewardess part. You need to settle down. People around your spouse were trying to tell them, especially people that God sent to him, you need to settle down. You need to start thinking of settling down. You need to start thinking of your legacy. Meanwhile, the priest went back to the office. The young man that was set to replace him was still in the office, and he was like, so I'm supposed to replace him. Well, what do I need to know? And so on and so forth. Let me explain something to you. Be cautious of people that are inquiring too many specific details about certain things. These people are digging for information. Now, you got to seek God for that, because sometimes people are coming in and it may look innocent, but don't take everything at face value. Pray about everything. If a person approaches you, even if they're supposed to take a spot, don't just assume that they're asking questions because they're seeking out what their position is supposed to be. For some of them, it is not the case at all. In some cases, they're monitoring spirits seeking information. Okay? So the young man was asking a lot of questions. So he finishes up his writings. The whole reason that the priest is with him in the first place is to document. Think about what the disciples were doing when they were with Jesus. Each one of them was documenting their experiences and their travels with Jesus Christ during that 3-year period of his life. You understand what I'm saying? That's what this priest is doing. So the young assistant leaves him that night after he's finishing up the last of his notes. But you see this guy watching the young assistant leave the building. And he goes and he turns his head to look back toward the building like he was scouting the place out, like he was thinking about going in there. So you figure, he gonna go in there and do something. So the next thing you see, catch this, is the witch hunter is sitting there at his desk in his apartment. He's at the desk and there are a bunch of watches, clocks, and even the window next to his desk looks like a clock, like it's a bell tower clock. This man, your spouse, thinks he got all the time in the world to do what he needs to do. There were watches in front of him from different periods of time. One was crushed. Another one was from a different age of time. You could tell it was looked like it may have been from England in the late 1890s. It was another one that looked like it was from the early 90s or early 1900s. Then it was another one that looked like it was a newer watch, and one that he was working on, which I think was one that had been thoroughly crushed, that he was trying to get the face to put into a new base and get the hands on the watch to move the right way. So he's fixing the watches. This can be viewed in two different ways. God is, one, giving you back the time that was lost. A lot of us have dealt with delays, and God's giving me this right now. A lot of us have dealt with a lot of delays. I talked about this in one of the other previous parts of this film, that we've been dealing with delay after delay. In God's timing, when he gives you back the time, you will be able to make strides speedily, getting back a year getting 10 years back in 1 year, getting 15 years back in 5 years. He's giving you back the time. Secondly, your men think they got all the time in the world, so they ain't in no rush. And have not been in no rush to get hooked up with nobody permanently, especially with what they've been dealing with in warfare with these relationships. Stephanie P, when she did her video on kingdom marriage, she talked about, funny enough, people in highly established career sets, that the curse over them will be a curse that was put on them where either it was the parent. Bold for Christ did a word on parental curses, where the parent cursed the child in order to get the what's the word? The spoils of what the child's work was doing, but the child didn't get it, meaning he had to give it to the parent. And if he did not, he would actually receive confusion in his life if he did not give over to the parent, because that was part of the deal of the curse, that the parent would receive the child's inheritance or something like that. So they're working, toiling, and striving in order for the parent to receive it, if you understand what I'm saying. Secondarily, because of the curse the parent put on the child, that the child ain't have no idea that the parent did, the child is dealing with repetitive bad relations and relationships. Stephanie went over this. To keep him in toxic relations, so he ain't even concerned about the time no more, because he ain't like, I don't even care no more. I'm not even going to get into a relationship. Continual singleness. Okay? Ooh, I'm going to tell you about some of this stuff later. Anyway. So, I just explained the way that the watches looked. This man is immortal. If you haven't figured it out, he's immortal. He runs through time. There is no time frame for him. He does not flow in the same time frame. God does not flow in the same time frame as everybody else. His time frame is much easier because he has no time. Time is endless to him. He was around before time started. We started counting time when Eve and Adam hit the garden. We did not understand that God was still around prior to that. And we don't know how long he was around prior to that. You understand what I'm saying? So, there is no essence of time. This man had been around for over 1,800 years. He had no sense of time. Which brings us back to Deani Neves did a word talking about expect it sooner than you think. And she was explaining, which brought back the scripture that I talked about earlier in 2 Peter 3, 11 through 13, I think it was. Not in the NLT version. It was another version I read that had a better version. Look it up in a Message and or try the King James. But I like Message sometimes. But she talked about 2 Peter 3 and 11 all the way through. And the breakdown of our time in relation to God's time, for we all know Jeremiah 29 and 11 talks about his ways are not like our ways, his thoughts are not like our thoughts. His view of time is not like our view of time, okay? So, I remember I made a video where I talked about I had been waiting for something for a certain amount of years. But if you calculate that in the assumption of the 1,000-year time frame, and you break down the 1,000-year time frame into that, I think it had been maybe 7 years or what have you, what that would have been in God's time. That's 20 minutes. And it's like 20 minutes. Wow. It's not a long time, right? So when God looks at time, that was just an example. God ain't looking at it like you're looking at it. And what Deani was making the point of saying was that basically you can have a time frame. Somebody told me this a long time ago. God's view of immediately can be right now or 1 to 3 years from now. 1 to 3 years from now. So if that's the case, a 1 to 3 year time frame, when you're saying or hearing, oh, it's sooner than you think, you thinking it was late. Oh, it's late. It's sooner than I thought. It was late 3 years ago. Yeah. And God's saying, and she put it this way, it's sooner than your latest and later than your soonest. Go watch the video. But time does not measure the same way. That's my whole point. Coming back to the film, he gets a call telling him that his friend had died. So, due to the fact that these men, oh my goodness, I'm looking at the note, pride, they needed to allow their pride to die. Oh my goodness, God gave me a song. I don't know whether I'm going to put it in after this or before this. But boy, he gave me a song by this artist I ain't never heard of. It came on the radio the other day. I was like, oh, these men are ready. They ready. But yeah, they had to allow that to die. His friend has supposedly died. And I said that for a reason. He's distraught over hearing about that. He goes to the ceremony, to the swearing in, pretty much, of the new priest that was to take his place. And I always thought when that happened, I was like, this guy dies the night before. He gets killed the night before this new guy is supposed to take his place. That bothered me because I'm like, why would you kill him? And he was literally about to step out the position anyway. Why would this guy die just before he was to get replaced anyway? That felt off. So he watches and then he goes outside. There's something I've been saying recently. Watch, observe, discern. So the young man finishes the ceremony, couldn't find where the witch hunter went. So he comes outside and sees him sitting on a bench. This is a bench he's always sitting on. Now, he goes to sit next to the man. He said, I'm going to do your friend well and all this kind of stuff. If anybody comes up to you to work with you and they really are way too secure about their position, question that. He ain't ask him all that. He ain't asked for no explanation. He ain't allowed. A normal person is just gonna allow it to flow as it is. But this person is almost making as if he's got to say this stuff. Think about that. False flattery is a sign that that person is not for you. Okay? Next. He's observing, watching, observing, and discerning. So, after he's out there, he's honoring his position and all this kind of stuff. He's sitting there, he ain't really paying attention to half the stuff he's saying, but he makes a mention of the fact. He's like, you see that corner store right there in the middle of the square on the opposite side? And he's like, yeah, you see that? It's like, yeah. It's in the courtyard over there. He's like, yeah. It's like, I used to sit on this same bench when this whole thing was just a cornfield. Before all these buildings. And they sitting in New York. I think it's New York or Chicago. So you know. That must have been a long time ago. And I'm even going to make this reference. When I was in New York, there was the building I was staying in was over 100 years old. 100 and some odd years old. I looked it up online and the building had been there since before buildings were even in that area. There were no buildings in that area 100 years prior to that. It was literally, with that being said, you should have known there was a bunch of spiritual activity around that building. Okay? I just thought I'd mention that since we was here. So they leave to go check out the old priest's apartment. So as they're leaving, he's observing, he looks out the window, and he's watching and waiting. Because he opens the window just like he always does, so that the cool air from the outside, because it's cold enough that he has a coat, that he's literally watching. He's watching and he blows on the window and something ain't right. Because he's like, I don't see nothing. There's no presence of witchcraft or something. And the young man starts talking and he's like, And he's checking the area around it and he's like, I don't see nothing wrong here. Everything looks okay. But just before he leaves, he's walking across the floor and he notices there were 3 dead bugs on the ground. I think a fly just hit my foot, only as another reminder. And this day that I watched, this was actually within the 24 hours that I watched this movie, when I sat down to write the note for this movie. Now, as we know, insects are residue, lingering, and monitoring. The experience I've had with these daggone flies lately. But it's funny that morning that I was writing this note for this movie, The Price is Right was on. And see, one of the models, Drew Carey, made the point of saying that the model killed 3 flies. And all 3 flies were laying on the countertop to whatever it was that was the model that she pulled, she rolled it out for a display that day. And they zoomed in on the 3 dead flies. Funny enough, there was a fly in here the other day that my dad and I could not catch. And it's been in here a while. I'm not stupid, nor am I dumb. We know that spiritually, insects are monitors, okay? Especially if you got a witch on your tail. And this one particular fly, I remember I was taking a shower the other day. I saw it in the shower. I was like, and it was by the water, which made me confused. I'm like, oh, you're definitely a monitoring spirit, because of the fact that an average fly wouldn't get this close to water. And me and my dad sat on this couch and could not kill this fly for nothing. But my dad caught him the other day. There was 2 though. There's another one in here. That's all right. God gonna make sure that one die. It's gonna go down. Anyway, with that being said, God is killing lingering issues, monitoring spirits, and cleaning up the residue. Okay? Next, he does something that blows some type of dust in the air, which reveals that there's a pentagram burnt into the floor. Okay? And when he does it again, the whole room shows that there were pentagrams burnt on the walls in multiple places. And there were burn marks in the chairs and other places. The room had been tousled, but it was the specific word I'm looking for, an enchantment done to the room, okay, to make it look like nothing was wrong. But I'm going to have to come back for the next part to talk about what comes up next. See you in a minute.